Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates women leaders in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharon Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, based right here in New York. And each week I'll be talking to women leaders about their work, their triumphs and challenges, providing invaluable insight into how women can unlock their superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So whether you're navigating your own career path in bioscience or you're passionate about science and innovation, I hope you're empowered and inspired by each episode. Today, I'm talking to a self-confessed learning nerd with an impressive educational background. She obtained her BA at Harvard, an MS in Global Affairs at Schwarzman College in Beijing, and an MBA in Business Administration at Stanford. She worked at the Gates Foundation during the height of the pandemic and shared in the excitement of Moderna's vaccine success. She's now CEO of Radar Therapeutics and is here to educate me, maybe you, in the field of genetic medicine. Please welcome my guest today, Sophia Lugo. Sophia, hello.
Sharon, good to see you.
How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on.
I really appreciate you taking the time out to have a chat with us today. Did you get your coffee?
I did. Thank you for sending it.
It's a pleasure. So I want to talk to you about your field of genetic medicine. What sparked your interest in that? And can you, as a layperson who doesn't fully understand, explain to me what that is that you're involved with?
Yeah. So genetic medicine broadly, they are medicines that use your genetic code to get cells to turn into their own drug factories. So the idea is that your DNA, so, at the turn of the century, there was the Human Genome Project that gave us the first draft of the DNA that is common to all of our cells. And the idea is that that is the blueprint that tells us who we are and what we do. And then I'll move a bit further into DNA gets made into RNA in cells, which gets made into proteins. And proteins are the little workhorses of the cells. They, we have different types of cells in the body. So, proteins are the little units that enact this work. The DNA gets made into RNA. The RNA is directly what is the code for the proteins, or what encodes for the proteins. So in a way, DNA is the hard drive, mRNA and RNA is the software, and proteins are the little working units. And the idea of genetic medicine is that you could take this DNA and RNA and you could change what cells do and how they behave by changing these codes. And so I became very interested in genetic medicine because you get into this whole idea of digital biology, where we could really take a very complex living being, and instead of drugging them with a small molecule or a biologic that have to be very specifically made to interact with cells or targets, you could get to the code that tells us what cells are doing, and you can take those very cells and get those cells to cure themselves or to fix themselves. You turn the cells into factories, so to speak, and you can read the code back. So I was very interested in these ideas of programming biology, of digitizing biology, and of getting into a modality that if we can solve it once for one application, we could potentially solve it for many applications and make it curative as well.
It's fascinating. Was it something that you knew from an early age that you were excited about, or was it something from school or when you moved on to college?
Yeah, I'd say by elementary school, I knew that I really liked school. So I'll say I knew that I was nerdy. I knew that I really enjoyed learning. I enjoyed reading a lot, and I particularly enjoyed reading nonfiction, so things about the real world. And I loved biology. So I wouldn't say it was genetic medicine, so to speak. I would say I liked collecting bugs. I liked collecting bugs and classifying the bugs and being outside and growing a plant and wondering why the plant is growing and how it's getting its nutrition. So it's the hows and whys of the world that were very interesting to me, and the whats, the classifications. So biology, I'd say broadly. Once I got to college, CRISPR at the time was it was hot, it was trendy, it was new. There was a possibility that CRISPR could be used for therapeutic use cases. And I was so excited by the prospect of that I'd point that to being where it started.
Right. But you're not a scientist. Are you? You're a
No.
business person.
Yes, I think I'd classify myself that way. I am science fluent, as one has to be when it's biotech. I did study biology. I have worked in a lab. But when I worked in that lab in undergrad, I realized that my undergrad project unfortunately did not come to anything. Sometimes you don't come to any conclusion. You can't replicate the science that your project is based on. And there was a lot of frustration. And even though I loved my PI and I loved my lab, and my PI, someone who made a very important discovery, in the field of neurobiology told me, Sophia, to be a scientist, you have to be curious and you have to be intensely patient because you may make 2 to 3 discoveries in your lifetime that make the entire career worth it. And I can't say that I was patient enough to want to go down that route. I knew I loved science. Knew I loved learning, but I wanted to move forward. I wanted to make progress. I wanted, I want to see an impact that it has in the world. And I think when you apply science to therapeutics, and often that's in private industry, you do get to see that because you're doing science that has an end goal that has a timeline attached to it because of IP, because of, requirements to return money to investors, because of competitive pressures. But there's more of a timeline attached. So I liked, as I explored what I wanted to do with my love of science, it led me to more of the business side, but still within biotech, within healthcare, within the life sciences.
So talk to me about Radar Therapeutics. How did that come about?
Yeah, so Radar Therapeutics, I was doing my MBA at Stanford. And there's a longer story behind that I can tell. Had studied biology at Harvard and had worked in a lab and had known that it wasn't the right path. I also knew at that point that pre-med wasn't the right path for other reasons. So I was looking for something to do and ended up in China doing my master's on biodata privacy. Then, got a job at BGI Genomics, which is it's a company like Illumina in China, DNA sequencing. And then I had worked at BCG and in healthcare and life sciences, and then had worked at the Gates Foundation nonprofit, and then had done sprinkled throughout many clinical rotations. So I had broadly been in the biotech healthcare space, always knowing that I had a passion for science and had a bit of shiny object syndrome. I loved discoveries that were being made. So when I was doing my MBA at Stanford, I knew I wanted to start a company. That's the reason for having done the MBA at Stanford. Particularly, it's a very good program for those who want to be entrepreneurs. I was working at the licensing office, and part of my job was to look at life science, patent portfolios that were coming out of Stanford, particularly the ones with a lot of commercial potential, and get them out into the world. So that's how, I'd heard of the Radar license because it was one that was very popular, I'd say. Independently, a friend of mine that I had talked to about my excitement for mRNA, which was, again, I was really excited about CRISPR and DNA in college. And by the time I was at my MBA, I was really excited about mRNA because of my time at the Gates Foundation. I was there during the pandemic when an mRNA-based vaccine was being rushed to approval.
Yep.
So I must have mentioned it, and she probably hadn't heard many MBAs mention their love for mRNA, and she was, she insisted on introducing me to my now co-founder, Eric. So when I met Eric, I had familiarity with his license, and I read his paper, and I talked to him, and our first conversation was just actually on our values and what we want to see in the world, and we felt we had a lot of synergies. And by the second conversation, we talked more about Radar and his desire to bring this into the world. And then that's history. We started working on it right away, and in a trial period at first to see if we could work well together, and made it into a company, licensed the technology from the academic context, and we're here now with Radar Therapeutics.
Excellent. And what stage is the company at?
Mm-hmm. On the clinical timeline, we're a preclinical company. I'd say. There are maybe more than 1,300 mRNA molecules in development in industry, and 92% are preclinical stage. So we're in that set of molecules. We are a seed stage company, which means we have been able to replicate what was done in academia and shown that there is actually strong potential. A lot of times in academia, you're not showing necessarily that there's therapeutic potential. You're showing that there's potential for, in this case, for selectively activating mRNAs across different types of cells. we were able to replicate this and then show that there was therapeutic potential. And now that's what we're focusing on at the company, is moving it into the models and the data sets that the FDA sees as relevant. But yes, still very much a seed stage company.
Okay. And what have been the highs and the lows for you personally on this journey with Radar?
The very high highs and the very low lows. I think that the highs, there are many highs when you're doing something that no one has done before. For me, the vision is inspiring. This is my dream job. I couldn't have imagined a more exciting technology with a more deep potential impact of curing lives and very broad and complex indications that I could be working on. And so whenever I get a chance to present that, which as the CEO is your main job, I get inspired myself. The highs come from being surrounded by incredibly intelligent people that we've been able to bring onto Radar's mission. That includes our advisors, it includes our full-time employees. Getting to interact with people, like our co-founder, Jim Collins, professor at MIT, considered the father of synthetic biology. I almost had to pinch myself when he agreed to come on board, that we would be able to access him as an advisor, and he's a co-founder for our company. It makes me feel like I'm in a moment in time, in a moment in history, not just in my life, but in the global scale of things. So the highs come very often. They also come when we present our vision. We've been given a lot of opportunities in the recent past to present our vision, and we're very glad that scientists and other drug developers are very excited about what Radar can do. We've had a slew of industry awards. We've presented a lot of conferences. We had a lot of media attention. That excites me when people see what I see, because then it tells me maybe there is promise here. It's not just me and my co-founder, Eric. The lows, science is still hard. Science is hard, and you want it to move linearly. You want to, almost like iterate on this product, and the product just gets iteratively better. But sometimes just like what happened to me in my lab in undergrad, I would make progress and it was more confusion than there was progress. And eventually, I couldn't really get anything out into the world. And here we do make progress, but it is definitely not linear. We learn from positive results, we learn from negative results, and we're happy that overall we're getting to move it in the right direction. But you hope that every experiment is going to be a holy grail and magically work out, and you find out that cells act in very unexpected ways. And maybe that's the medium. The true lows, since this is my dream job, it's really hard to say about true lows. It's hard work. It's hard work for sure. So sometimes it gets just physically tiring, but a lot of fuel to keep us going.
So I guess one of the key things is that if it's, there's lows in everything, isn't there? Everything you do, there's highs and there's lows, and then you overcome the lows and you celebrate the highs and everything else. I guess what's more difficult to overcome the lows is if it isn't your passion, if it isn't your dream job, and if it isn't something that you're totally committed to, those lows can chip away at you. So I think a word of advice to budding entrepreneurs and budding people in this field is be sure it's what you're passionate about. Be sure it is your dream.
Absolutely. I mean, it is incredibly hard to do something that no one else has done before. Entrepreneurship is in its essence, you have to go against convention, and against what's been possible. And if you do not love the problem, do not start, because those are years of your precious life where you have to be the one championing this idea to everyone else. Being able to tell the story is really important. So I think that's absolutely correct. You have to love the problem. I think for us at Radar, whether this is a success or failure, and I think all signs point to this is a technological challenge, and right now all signs point to us being successful, but whether it's a success or a failure, this is certainly worth working on.
It's going to move forward either way.
Right.
If it's
Right.
not, and then that'll be almost, I guess, passing the baton to the next level of therapeutic, the next challenge. You can tell I'm not a
Exactly.
scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I would
Yeah.
imagine if this gets to a point and isn't, it's like this doesn't work, it's okay, well then let's pivot and find another area that makes it work. It's another path to it, right? So it's just keep doing those puzzles and keep working that through.
Yeah. I mean, failure rate in pharma is incredibly high. And
Yep.
whenever we look at where to point our technology, we pay as much attention, maybe even more attention to what has failed in humans than to what has succeeded. Both are really elucidating. Turns out the human body is very complex. It's very hard to model, even from mouse to human. So it's part of the process. The very exciting point about genetic medicines is that medicines like mRNA and CRISPR, CRISPR-Cas9 and these technologies are what we call modular. They're modular because the idea is you could optimize most of the model, the molecule. So if you take a piece of mRNA, the way radar works is radar is essentially a find and write function. Find a target cell type and then write a program or, write a program into it, write a function into it. And the idea is that you optimize all parts of the molecule and you switch out, these are sequences, so think of them as letters, just code. Switch out the code that is the find function and switch out the code that is the write function and go after a new biology. And so that's the promise of genetic medicine, that you could optimize the molecule and just switch out some components to make it switch between different indications. The same idea is, even if you're successful in one indication, that you could go after the next one in a shortened development timeline. And we
Yep.
saw that with the COVID-19 vaccine. Moderna had been developing their platform for 10 years for different indications, and they were able within 48 hours to design their molecule, upon receiving the sequence, not even a live version of the virus, but upon receiving the sequence of the COVID-19 virus, they were able to design it within, 2 days.
Mm.
And the rest is history. The development timeline was unprecedented. That is the promise, being able to pivot in that way,
Yeah.
versus you can't do that with small molecules and biologics.
Yeah, I was slightly involved in that. I work with the Weizmann Institute
Mm.
of Science, or their fundraising arm in New York, and obviously they were very involved with Pfizer and Pfizer's vaccine for COVID, and it's just I just found it incredible that it's almost when your back's against the wall and when something has to happen, it's that science and humanity and everything comes together to sort of make it happen, and that the opportunities are there.
I cannot imagine the excitement that the people working at Moderna had
Mm.
to see the major impact, within a 2-year span, could start to see how they were saving, you know, potentially millions of
Yep.
lives. So
Yep.
I can't imagine the excitement of being a scientist and working so hard on this platform that hasn't had an approval, and then suddenly there it is. This is why this problem was worth working on. And, investors had to be patient. So I think it's incredibly exciting. And we have to be thankful to people who put their trust in science too. It was a large experiment that everyone was being asked to be a part of. During the vaccine, there's this new modality. The reality is, no, we didn't understand what potential side effects were. No, we didn't know if, the immunogenicity of the molecule. We didn't know the dosing regimen. We didn't know many things. But we have to be thankful that people were willing to take a bet, and a bet that was more about, I mean, it's a very curious bet because these are healthy people choosing to be part of really a big, I don't want to call it a science experiment, but an experimental process that ended up saving the lives of their neighbors.
Yep.
So yeah, I think
And,
it
and
was
people willingly said, yeah, let's give this a go. I mean, I don't want to push you too much on the vaccine side, but people have said to me, well, vaccine should mean that you're completely immune to something. But with COVID, it's not. It's still, you get a certain amount of protection. There's another, there's rounds of it going on all the time. Do you see a vaccine that is a true vaccine that says, okay, you take this and it will prevent it? Or is COVID too fluid in its how it manifests itself?
Yeah, I mean, we do see even in the flu vaccine has to change every year. That's why you have to
Yep,
get it again. And so even
yep,
if your body is, all that vaccines are is they teach our body to react to something. Your body just is learning. That's all. But right now, the COVID vaccine, it learned against a very specific variant of the COVID virus.
yep.
There are companies, very exciting companies, I'll give a pitch for Centovax here, that are working on universal vaccines. So I think it is a possibility. Scientists are working on it. But we didn't know enough about how the COVID-19 virus evolved at the time to be able to, robustly predict.
Yeah.
But the
And
great thing
and wait
about,
another year while people
yeah,
are
exactly.
dying to find perfection.
Right.
Yeah.
So part of it is, there's a big concerted effort, epidemiological effort to understand what variant are people affected with, and when a new one has come up. So, that's why you see vaccines changing, and they have to change to something. But there are efforts to make universal vaccines, and I hope Centovax is successful in their mission to make a universal vaccine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's the future for you? What's keeping you driving and going, and what will the future look like for you?
Yeah. Um, I think the future for Radar and what keeps me going is it would be the honor of a lifetime, a life worth living to see our drug cure people. We think that we have a unique opportunity to do so. There, right now, I think on the technological side, the holy grail for genetic medicines is to be able to get them delivered in vivo, which essentially means ex vivo means you remove a patient's blood or you remove a patient's cells and you re-engineer them outside the body and then you put them back into the body and then they work that way, which has a lot of logistical challenges. The holy grail is you'd be able to get a shot, more likely an IV transfusion, day of the drug would be able to autonomously find where it needs to go and then act in the body. That's the holy grail, and that's what something that Radar enables with its find and write function. We can imagine Moderna's mRNA, BioNTech's mRNA is a write function, and ours is a read and write function.
Right.
And so I think that this read function would could be applicable to almost any genetic medicine, DNA based or mRNA based. If Radar is successful, we could imagine a future where Radar helps regulate or helps all genetic medicines be very precise about what cells they are manipulating. Um, and so on the technological side, I would be very excited to see Radar be something that catalyzes all genetic medicines to move forward and get to different diseases faster than they do now. That's one of the promises is faster development
Yep.
timelines. And that would be it would be incredibly exciting to impact the field that way. And then on the other side, it would be an honor that I would have spent my time helping people live better lives. There are very many important problems to work on, but your health
Mm.
is existential. And the way that families react to uncertainties about health or certainties that are negative about health,
Yep.
um, these become some of the most consequential moments in one's lifetime. And science is here to help.
So what piece of advice would you give to somebody who might be listening to this who's thinking, you know, is there what strengths, what attributes, what do I need to be a successful female entrepreneur? From your perspective, what piece of advice would you give that person?
Yeah. We will start with what it looks like out there for women entrepreneurs. It is harder to be a woman entrepreneur because VCs are professional pattern recognizers. And so far, historically, there is a very strong pattern that the best entrepreneurs happen to be white males. And unless one believes that men are somehow biologically inclined to be better or naturally better, then we have to believe there's something social going on and contributing to this trend. It also happens that most VCs are white males and end up we like to bet on things that are familiar to us. And so there's a lot of subconscious bias going on, and we have to recognize that 2% of VC funding goes to women-led businesses. That means that there is a blocker to true meritocracy. In my view, there's no trade-off between diversity and meritocracy. So there is subconscious bias. So as a woman entrepreneur, I almost have to say you have to be ready to go to battle. You have to be very ready to face a world where you will be disadvantaged. And I always just take that into consideration. There's a Harvard study that, an HBS study out there that says that women-led businesses are actually more successful. And I think the metrics for success had to do something with shareholder returns, and these were public companies. And why could that be the case? It is very possible that, and there are much less of them, that women just had to be better at their job to get to the positions that they're in. So know that it is hard out there. Know that you'll be facing bias. My recommendation is just be the better person. Just show that you have what it takes, knowing that you might have to do more. I honestly think that the only way that we can change the paradigm is if there are more of us. And at the beginning, that is just means that we have to do more and try harder than our potentially white male counterparts. And we have to be okay with that. I think there's also strength in numbers. I have found that, for people who have experienced bias, it is very easy for us to recall an example of it. And it is having a community of other people that might be experiencing the same is probably a helpful way to go about it. So I have found it extremely helpful to have other women business leaders in my network that understand what we have to go through and are there to be the worst scenarios has been, you experience bias and then you tell someone who has no context for it, and then they pretend it possibly didn't happen or misinterpreted. You find that often people who've experienced it believe you or have words of advice. And I have that in my network. One of our advisors is Svetlana Lucas, CBO at Scribe, just an incredible powerhouse of a woman, potentially the best woman in BD in the US right now. She's done 3 very large deals in the past couple of years for Scribe. And she just takes me under my wing and makes sure that I have other women leaders around me, that I have a network, that if I'm in a group of all men, that she pushes me forward and makes sure I have a presence there too. I'm not being ignored.
It's so important, isn't it? I think that the networking, previous episodes that we've done of the show, it's literally one thing that's come up time and time again of the importance of women continuing to network. You don't play golf, and it's a different type of networking, but having that community of women, those who have gone before and those who are yet to come through, can provide that comfort area, I guess, if nothing else.
Exactly. And I'll also say there are also men that for some reason are like primed to think the same way, that there might be bias and they're primed to try to spot it. There are men who are primed to do that. My co-founder is one of them. So he's incredibly supportive. If he sees anything that he's like, I wonder if that would have happened if to someone who was, who looked
different.
He's very primed to be supportive, and that having that partnership with him too has been very, very helpful, because you feel less insane, and I know that I have the support there. So, and there's other male CEOs who bring the same.
Maybe that's another group that we should get together for a network.
Right.
That might be a future show there that I could look at doing. So
yes.
Who knows? Well, listen, thank you. I'm very conscious of your time, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me today. I'm fascinated with where you've come. I've really been watching your journey over the last 8-9 months, I think, since you first got your funding to move forward, and I'm excited to see the talks that you do and the panels that you're on. So young entrepreneurs who are making their way out there in the world, I certainly think that you're a champion for them, and so thank you, and I look forward to seeing the continued success that you have.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm based in New York. If you're looking to hire talent for your company or want support in achieving your career goals, please reach out to me at contact@cnaint.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And remember, the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. So don't be afraid to share yours. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.